Hello, this is part 2 of ACES phone. I'm going to pick up on page 114, so follow along. I figured that out, said Martin. If you keep trying, you could find the way that feels better. That, said the old woman, that is exactly what you don't want to do. You gotta go the way that feels worse. That's the whole point. She fastened the top button of her coat and turned the collar up. Come on, she said. I'll show you. She made the call again. She stood up, listening. She took a few steps, changed direction, took a few more steps, and then kept doing this for a minute or so. Then she handed the phone to him. Okay, she said, listen hard and you'll hear a story of a whale. Sort of a whale. And you'll feel something kind of heavy and sad. Walk this way. And she pointed toward Avenue B. And the sadness will get worse. What you want is to find where it's coming from, so you keep going towards it. It's hard, but the more you do it, the stronger you get. So Martin walked. He set up Avenue B, gritting his teeth because the sad feeling was indeed getting worse. The whale was thin and far away, like the needle of a sound. And the sadness was like a stone in his chest. Every time the stone grew lighter, he knew he was going the wrong way. He had to pick out the faint wail from the chorus and turn towards it again and again. The whole time, Mrs. DeSalvo kept talking. Last week, out near Anderson Ave, I found a little mutt that got the worst of a dog fight. All of the side of him all bloody. She stamped alongside beside him, shaking her head. We got an arrangement with the animal shelter, by the way. They fix up the ACES dogs for free. There was Martin's neighborhood now. That's where I live, he said, pointing at his building. On the 3rd floor. There's 7 of us. He would have told her more about his father wanted to look better for a better place, but never had time. About how he had to share his room with his 4-year-old and 5-year-old. But the stone in his chest was dragging on his words, making them heavy and hard to say. He fought against the desire to sit down on the sidewalk and curl up into a ball. Then there's the worst ones, said Mrs. D, after a quick glance at the building. They turned the corner onto 18th Street. That's when you find people being cruel to their dogs. Now this I can't stand. Martin put his free hand over his other ear. He didn't want to hear about it. The sadness coming at him over the phone was almost more than he could stand. The stone on his chest felt like a load of bricks now, attached by a chain to his heart. They turned up near Carter Street and went by the Chinese grocery and the noodle shop and the dry cleaners. Every now and then, Mrs. D took the phone from him and listened herself to make sure he was doing all right. This is real heavy for your first time, she said. Sorry about that. Used the bookstore. They went past the ice cream place. Martin's knees wanted to crumble. His feet weighed 10 pounds apiece. But it isn't all bad, I want you to know, Mrs. D went on. I can't tell you how many dogs I've returned to their families. Martin wasn't listening. He was afraid he couldn't stand it anymore. He thought he might collapse onto the curb and start sobbing. I can't do this. He grasped out the words. At first she didn't hear him. I can't, he said again, but he kept going anyhow. And in a minute he realized something odd. He'd come to a spot where no matter what direction he took, the feeling grew just a tiny bit weaker. If he stood still, it was horribly strong. He told her so. Then we're here, she said. This is it. They'd come to a big apartment building, 350 Lincoln Ave, with wide steps leading to a double door. The door was open because 2 men were carrying a table between them were coming out. Grab the door, Mrs. D whispered to Martin. He did, and they slipped inside. All right, now listen. You should hear one voice all by itself now. He listened. The doleful feeling led him up the first flight of stairs and down a hall. At the end was an open door. It was clear whoever lived here had moved out. Big taped-up cardboard boxes stood in the hall. You want me to take over now? Said Mrs. D. Martin shook his head. He wasn't going to go through all this just to quit at the end. Then go in there and find out what's going on, she said. I'll wait for you out here. Martin turned off the phone and handed it to Miss D. He stepped inside to the apartment. It was nearly empty except for rolled-up carpet. He smelt paint. The only noise was faint scrapping sound coming from another room. He followed the sound. In the living room, which overlooked the street, stood a man facing the windows, with his back to Martin. He was taping up a piece of paper to the glass. Excuse me, Martin said. The man turned around. Who are you, kid? Martin said his name. Is there a dog here? He asked. Sure, said the man. In there, in the kitchen. He pointed across the hall. People left him behind. Can you believe it? Just left him, without a word. He turned back to his taping. So I got to take him to the pound, unless you want him. Martin went into the kitchen. There, under the kitchen table, tied to a table leg with a piece of rope, was a curled-up heap of sorrow, a small dog, white with the brown patches and triangle ears. Without raising his head, he swiveled his eyes to look up Martin. His tail was tucked around his rump. He was trembling. Martin squatted down and put his head on the dog's back. Hey, dog, he said quietly. Hey, good dog, I'm here now. He untied the rope from the table leg and coaxed the dog to his feet. Slowly, he led him out of the kitchen. The man was sweeping the floor of the living room now. Martin looked at the piece of paper taped to the window. It said, for rent. How much, he asked. The old man told him. Martin's heart sped up. How many bedrooms? 4, the man said. Martin's heart beat so hard he could make his voice shake. I know a family who might like it, he said. Nice people. My family. Will you hold it till I can get my father to come look? Okay, said the man. But you better get him right now. This place is going to go fast. When Martin came out, Mrs. D, who had been listening by the door, cast a glance at the little dog and told Martin her hunch had been right. She was turning over the ACES job to him. Meant to be, she said. Meant to be, no doubt about it. Just in time, too. My feet are too old for this. She frowned at him, and her purple hat fell down over her eyebrows. Now you won't get sick of this and quit, will you? No, said Martin. And if you ever do want to quit, you'll find someone to take over, won't you? Yes, said Martin. She nodded once and then handed him the phone. Then she reached out and snatched it back again. She hit the 5 button and held the phone to her ear. Just want to listen one more time, she said. She stood there for a minute or so, then she turned and slumped away. And in the months and years that followed, people in the neighborhoods around 14th Street Park became accustomed to seeing a tall boy on his incline skates every afternoon gliding along the streets with a cell phone pressed to his ear. They figured he was the delivery boy of some kind. He never told anyone what his job really was. To his family and his friends, he said he was out practicing his skating. It was true, he did get a lot of practice. Some days he skated for miles, answering dozens of urgent calls. Other days he might only be 1 or 2 calls, or only 1. And now and then came a day when the feelings pouring through the phone contained not a single thread of distress, when all the dogs in all 20 blocks were well fed and contented, either safe at home or romping happily with their people. On those afternoons, Martin left his skates in his apartment, went to the 14th Street Park, and played ball with his own dog, who is no longer sad. Okay. So for your dig deeper on page 120, it's the story structure. We've done this in class. You guys have done this many times. All I want you to do is provide the setting. Where does the story take place? Okay. Inner city, country. What type of setting does this take place? What characters are in this story? List the names of the characters. And what's the plot? What is the story about? Okay? So that should be pretty simple for you guys to do because you've done it before. So go back, reread the story if you need to, look through it, and fill out this graphic organizer on page 120. Okay? Thanks for watching.